If you have diabetes, or if every single time you eat bread, toast, pancakes, or anything made with flour, your energy just tanks, your blood sugar spikes, or you feel sleepy, heavy, and hungry again within the hour, I need you to stop whatever you're doing right now. Because what I am about to share with you in the next few minutes could genuinely change the way you look at food for the rest of your life. And I am not saying that to grab your attention. I am saying it because after years of working directly with people managing type 2 diabetes, I have seen how one small practical shift in the kitchen, something as simple as swapping a bag of flour, can quietly transform someone's mornings, their energy, and their blood sugar numbers in ways that medicine alone sometimes cannot. So please stay with me through this entire video. Because the fifth flour on this list is one that almost no one talks about, and the fourth one, well, it might be the most underestimated tool in blood sugar management that exists right now. You do not want to miss either of those. Now, here's the thing that most people living with diabetes do not know, and honestly, most people who care for people with diabetes do not talk about enough. The flour sitting in your kitchen right now, the regular white wheat flour, the same flour in your bread, your tortillas, your pancake mix, that flour may be raising your blood sugar faster than pure table sugar. Let me say that again. Faster than table sugar. Researchers have measured this. White refined wheat flour has a glycemic index of around 85. Table sugar sits around 65. So when you eat two slices of regular white bread, your blood glucose can jump 40 to 50 points in under 30 minutes. That is happening to millions of people every single morning while they genuinely believe they are making a normal, even healthy choice. And the worst part is not even the spike itself. The worst part is what happens after. Your pancreas rushes to release insulin to deal with that flood of sugar. Your body handles it, but at a cost. And then you come down hard. The energy crash, the brain fog, the irritability, that hollow, restless hunger that hits again barely an hour after breakfast. And if this is happening every single day, every single meal, over months and years, that repeated stress on your insulin system is one of the key drivers behind worsening insulin resistance. It is not a mystery, it is measurable biology, and you can change it. And here is something that makes this even more interesting. The way white flour is processed is a big part of why it behaves so aggressively in your body. When wheat is milled into refined white flour, the outer layer of the grain called the bran and the inner core called the germ are both stripped away. What is left is almost purely starch, and starch, without any fiber or protein to slow it down, digests almost instantly. Your body barely has to work to break it apart. It is already so processed before it even enters your mouth that your digestive system can convert it into glucose in a matter of minutes. This is a very different situation from, say, eating a whole grain that still has its bran intact. The fiber in that bran acts like a natural brake pedal. Take the bran away, and you have removed the brakes entirely. That is white flour. That is why the numbers are what they are. So, before we go any further, I want to ask you something in the comments. What food raises your blood sugar the fastest? Is it bread, rice, potatoes, tortillas? Drop it below because I read every single one of these. And sometimes the things people share in the comments teach me more than textbooks ever did. And when someone else scrolling through sees your comment and realizes they are not going through this alone, that matters more than you might think. Now, let me explain something simple that makes all of this make sense. Imagine your bloodstream as a calm, steady river. When you eat regular refined white flour, it is like someone throwing open a giant floodgate. Sugar pours in all at once. The river overflows. Your body goes into emergency mode. Insulin spikes. Sugar drops. And you feel it. Now imagine a different kind of flour. One where instead of that floodgate opening all at once, sugar enters like a slow, controlled drip. Steady, predictable. Smooth, No flood, no panic, no crash. Same meal. Completely different result inside your body. That difference is what scientists call glycemic impact. And it is the single most important thing to understand when you are choosing what to cook with. Not just calories, not just carbs, but how fast those carbs turn into sugar and enter your blood. And here's what I want you to hear clearly: the problem is not bread, the problem is not flour, the problem is the wrong flour. Because there are specific flours you can start using right now today in your own kitchen without a prescription, without spending a fortune, without giving up the foods you love. These flours do not just avoid dangerous spikes. Some of them actively help improve how your body uses insulin. Some of them slow down sugar absorption from your entire meal, not just from themselves. And one of them forms a protective gel inside your digestive system that literally buffers glucose before it ever reaches your bloodstream. Real science, real results. And every single one of them is practical enough to use in a regular home kitchen. So today I am walking you through the 5 best flours for people with diabetes. These are not trendy internet hacks. These are backed by research, used in clinical practice, and most importantly, they work in real life. By the end of this video, you will know exactly which flours to keep in your kitchen, how to use each one, the most common mistakes people make with each one, and one very specific challenge I want you to try for the next 7 days that could genuinely shift the way your mornings feel. Let us get into it. Starting with the first flour, and this one is the most well known on the list, but it is still being misused and misunderstood by most people who try it: almond flour. Now, the moment most people with diabetes hear the word flour, a small alarm goes off. And that alarm is not their fault. They have been told so many times that carbs are the enemy, that anything that looks like bread or baked goods must be dangerous, that they have started avoiding everything in that category. But almond flour is not made from grain. It is made from finely ground almonds. And that changes everything about what it does inside your body. The glycemic index of almond flour is around 1, almost 0. To put that in perspective, remember that white flour is 85 and table sugar is 65. Almond flour at around 1 is essentially doing nothing to your blood sugar on its own. And the reason is simple. Almonds are made mostly of healthy fats, protein, and a mineral called magnesium. They are not fast carbohydrates. They do not flood your bloodstream. They slow things down. Now, here is where magnesium becomes really important for anyone with diabetes, because study after study has shown that people with type 2 diabetes tend to have lower magnesium levels than people without it. And low magnesium makes insulin work worse. It is like trying to turn a key in a lock that has gotten stiff and hard to turn. Magnesium helps loosen that lock. So, almond flour is not just avoiding the spike, it may be actively helping your insulin work the way it is supposed to. There's another thing about almond flour that rarely gets mentioned, and it has to do with something called the second meal effect. This is a real phenomenon that researchers have studied, and it basically means that what you eat for one meal can actually influence how your body responds to the next meal hours later. When you eat something like almond flour for breakfast, the combination of healthy fat, protein, and fiber creates a hormonal environment in your gut that keeps your blood sugar more stable, not just for that meal, but through lunch as well. One of the hormones involved is called GLP-1, which helps your body release insulin at the right pace rather than in a sudden rush. You do not need to memorize that name. The point is simple. A good breakfast choice can make your entire morning and even your midday meal go more smoothly for your blood sugar. Almond flour is one of the most consistent ways to trigger that effect. In terms of practical use, almond flour works beautifully in pancakes, cookies, muffins, pizza crust, and most low carb baking recipes. The texture is slightly denser than wheat flour, but most people adjust to it very quickly, usually within the first week of using it. Now, the most common objection I hear is that almond flour is too expensive. And that is a fair concern. Pre-packaged almond flour can cost quite a bit depending on where you live. But here's something most people do not know. You can make it at home by blanching almonds, removing the skins, drying them thoroughly, and blending them into a fine powder. It takes a little effort, but it brings the cost down dramatically. And the result is exactly the same flour you would buy at the store. One thing to keep in mind is portion size. Because almonds are calorie dense, almond flour is also calorie dense. It is not a flour you can use in massive quantities without paying attention. A reasonable portion in a recipe is your friend here. Used properly, it is one of the cleanest swaps you can make for someone managing blood sugar. And once people start using it in their morning pancakes or their weekend baking, most of them never go back to white flour for those recipes. Now, the second flour on this list does something even more specific and powerful. And the best way I can describe it is this. If almond flour is the quiet protector, the second flour is the active defender, the one that actually gets in between the sugar and your bloodstream and slows things down in a way you can almost feel. That flour is coconut flour. Coconut flour is made from dried coconut meat that has had most of its fat removed and has been ground into a fine powder. And the single most remarkable thing about it is its fiber content. Coconut flour contains roughly 13 times more fiber than regular wheat flour. 13 times. Now, think about what fiber actually does inside your digestive system. Most people think of fiber as something that keeps you regular, and yes, it does that. But in the context of blood sugar management, fiber acts like a net. Without fiber, sugar moves through your digestive tract quickly and enters your bloodstream in a rush. With fiber present, that process slows dramatically. The fiber physically slows the movement of food through your gut, gives your body more time to process glucose gradually, and reduces the size and speed of the blood sugar spike after a meal. Here is something even more specific that most people never hear about coconut flour. The type of fiber it contains is called insoluble fiber, combined with a notable amount of medium chain triglycerides, which are a very specific kind of fat. These medium chain fats are unusual because, unlike most dietary fats, they are absorbed directly and used as quick, clean energy rather than being stored or contributing to blood sugar. But more importantly, the insoluble fiber in coconut flour feeds the beneficial bacteria that live in your gut. And this matters for diabetes because your gut bacteria actually communicate with your pancreas. When the right bacteria are well fed and thriving, they produce compounds called short chain fatty acids that signal your body to release insulin more efficiently and reduce overall inflammation in your digestive tract. So, coconut flour is not just slowing sugar down, it is actively improving the environment where sugar management happens. Coconut flour has a glycemic index of around 35. That is well below white flour, well below most grain based flours, and still considerably lower than even the lower glycemic wheat options you might find at a health food store. It also has a naturally mild sweetness to it. Not strong, not artificial, just a subtle hint of sweetness that means many people find they can reduce the amount of added sugar or sweetener they use in a recipe when coconut flour is involved. That is a bonus benefit on top of the fiber benefit. The most critical thing to know about coconut flour, and this is where most people go wrong when they first try it, is that it absorbs liquid at an almost shocking rate. If you take a recipe that calls for 1 cup of wheat flour and you substitute 1 cup of coconut flour, the result will be dry, dense, and disappointing. Coconut flour typically requires only about 1/4 of the amount called for in a standard recipe, and it usually needs additional eggs or liquid to compensate for that absorption. Most coconut flour recipes are specifically written for coconut flour for this reason. If you are trying to substitute it in a traditional recipe, expect to experiment with the ratios and start with a small batch until you find what works. Used correctly, coconut flour makes excellent pancakes, flatbreads, quick breads, and baked goods. It gives a slightly denser texture than wheat flour, but has a pleasant, lightly sweet flavor that works well in both sweet and savory dishes. And the fiber benefit it delivers at every meal is genuinely meaningful for anyone trying to manage glucose levels throughout the day. Now we move into the third flour, and this one gets the most unfair reputation of the five. People hear the name, they think legume, they think carbs, and they immediately assume it is off limits for anyone with diabetes. But that reaction is based on a misunderstanding, and I want to clear that up right now. The third flour is chickpea flour, sometimes called garbanzo bean flour or gram flour. And once you understand what it actually does inside your body, I think you will see it very differently. First, the glycemic index. Chickpea flour sits around 44. That is more than half lower than white wheat flour. It is in the low to moderate range, meaning it does not cause rapid spikes. But the glycemic index alone is not even the most interesting thing about it. What makes chickpea flour particularly powerful for blood sugar management is its protein content. Chickpea flour has significantly more protein than wheat flour, and that matters for a very specific reason. Protein slows something called gastric emptying. That is just a plain way of saying protein slows down how fast food moves from your stomach into your small intestine. And when that process is slower, glucose enters your bloodstream more gradually. Less spike, longer lasting energy, more consistent blood sugar through the morning or afternoon. Beyond protein, chickpea flour contains something called resistant starch. This is a type of carbohydrate that your body does not fully break down into sugar. Instead of converting to glucose and entering your blood, resistant starch passes through your small intestine largely intact and feeds the beneficial bacteria in your colon. That is good for your gut health, but it is also directly good for your blood sugar because those are carbohydrates that are simply not raising your glucose the way regular starch would. So when people say chickpea flour has carbs, that is technically true, but the type of carbs matter enormously. Resistant starch is not the same thing as refined starch, and it does not behave the same way in your body. Now, here's something that most people do not know about chickpea flour and blood sugar that goes beyond resistant starch. Chickpeas naturally contain compounds called protease inhibitors. These compounds slow down the enzymes in your digestive system that are responsible for breaking carbohydrates apart into individual sugar molecules. Think of it like putting a slow setting on a machine that would normally run at full speed. Slower breakdown means slower absorption means a flatter, gentler rise in blood sugar. This is an effect that happens in addition to the fiber and protein benefits, and it is part of why people who switch to chickpea flour-based tortillas or flatbreads often notice their post-meal numbers look different almost immediately. Practically speaking, chickpea flour is one of the most versatile savory flours on this list. It makes outstanding tortillas and flatbreads. It is excellent in savory crepes, in an Italian dish called farinata, which is essentially a thin chickpea flour pancake baked in the oven, and it works very well as a thickener for soups and stews. It has a slightly nutty, earthy flavor that pairs naturally with savory seasonings like cumin, garlic, or coriander. And it has been used in cooking across South Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean for centuries, which tells you something about how nourishing and satisfying it is as a staple ingredient. The most common mistake people make with chickpea flour is treating it as a sweet baking flour. It is not a great substitute in cakes or cookies because its flavor leans savory. Use it in savory applications, and it becomes one of the most reliable and blood sugar friendly staples in your kitchen. All right, we are now moving into the part of this video where the information gets even more impactful because the first three flours on this list are genuinely excellent for managing blood sugar, but the next two flours, numbers 4 and 5, are where people often notice the biggest and fastest changes. More stable mornings, fewer energy crashes, better fasting glucose numbers when they check first thing in the day. I have had people come back to me and say, Within just 3 or 4 days of using these flours, they noticed they stopped feeling that heavy, tired crash after breakfast. The brain fog lifted. The desperate hunger an hour after eating went away. Their body just felt like it was working with them instead of against them. That is not a coincidence. It is what happens when you stop flooding your system and start feeding it with intention. And before I go further, I want to be very clear about something. You do not need to change everything at once. Please do not try to overhaul your entire diet in a week. That approach almost never sticks, and it adds unnecessary stress, which is itself bad for blood sugar. What works is starting small. One meal, one swap, 1 week. Check your glucose before and after if you have a monitor. Notice how your energy feels. Notice if the hunger comes back sooner or later. Let your own body give you the data. Simple, sustainable changes beat extreme overhauls every single time. And these next two flours are genuinely easy to start with. The fourth flour is one that I consider to be possibly the most powerful flour on this entire list, and it is also the most underused and overlooked. The fourth flour is flaxseed flour, sometimes called ground flaxseed or flax meal. And if you are not already using this, I want you to pay very close attention to this section because the science behind it is genuinely fascinating. Let us start with the basics. Flaxseed flour has an extremely low glycemic impact, close to zero. It barely moves blood sugar at all on its own. But that is not even close to the most impressive thing about it. What sets flaxseed flour apart from every other flour on this list is a very specific kind of fiber it contains called mucilaginous fiber. Now, I know that sounds like a complicated term, so let me explain it in plain language. Mucilaginous just means gel forming. When flaxseed flour comes into contact with liquid, either water or the liquids in your digestive system, it forms a thick, sticky, protective gel. Picture it like a slow-moving coating that lines part of your digestive tract. What does that gel do? It physically slows the absorption of sugar from everything you ate in that meal. Not just from the flaxseed itself, from the entire meal. The gel acts as a buffer between the digested food and the walls of your small intestine, where glucose is absorbed into the bloodstream. Less surface area contact means slower absorption, means a much smaller, much more gradual glucose rise. This is why people who regularly use flaxseed flour notice a difference not just in how high their blood sugar spikes, but in how smoothly and steadily their glucose moves after eating. The spikes become hills instead of mountains. The crashes soften. The whole pattern becomes more manageable. Now, here's a layer of flaxseed that most people never hear about. Flaxseed flour has a measurable effect on something called postprandial glucose, which just means blood sugar after a meal. Several studies have looked at what happens when people add ground flaxseed to their meals consistently over several weeks. The results showed not just lower spikes after eating, but actual improvements in fasting glucose, which is the number you get first thing in the morning before eating anything. That morning number matters because it reflects how well your body managed blood sugar through the night and how much background insulin resistance is present. Seeing that number improve from something as simple as adding ground flax to your meals is a meaningful sign that the body is responding. Flaxseed flour also contains compounds called lignans. Lignans are a type of plant-based compound that multiple studies have linked to improved insulin sensitivity. Insulin sensitivity is essentially the opposite of insulin resistance. The more sensitive your cells are to insulin, the less insulin your body needs to do its job, and the better your blood sugar control tends to be overall. Lignans appear to support this process, though researchers are still working to fully understand the exact mechanism. And then there are the omega-3 fatty acids. Flaxseed flour is one of the richest plant-based sources of a type of omega-3 called alpha-linolenic acid. Omega-3 fats are well known for their anti-inflammatory effects, and chronic low-grade inflammation is deeply tied to the progression of type 2 diabetes and its complications. Reducing inflammation is not a cure, but it is a meaningful piece of long term management. And getting omega 3s from whole food sources like flaxseed is one of the most practical ways to do it. So, to summarize what flaxseed flour does, it slows sugar absorption through gel formation. It may improve insulin sensitivity through lignans, and it reduces inflammation through omega 3 fats. All of that in a flour that costs very little, stores easily, and can be added to almost any recipe without dramatically changing the flavor. 2 tablespoons of flaxseed flour mixed into your pancake batter, your smoothie, your morning porridge, or your bread dough is genuinely one of the most impactful and effortless things a person with diabetes can do at the breakfast table. The flavor of flaxseed flour is mild and slightly nutty. It blends easily and does not overpower other ingredients. The only thing to be aware of is that it has a high fat content from those omega 3s, which means it can go rancid if stored improperly. Keep it in an airtight container in your refrigerator or freezer, and it will stay fresh for months. Buy ground flaxseed rather than whole flax seeds if possible, because whole seeds often pass through your digestive system without being fully broken down, meaning you lose many of the benefits. Ground is better. And if you can only find whole seeds, a quick pulse in a blender or coffee grinder will break them down in seconds. This flour genuinely surprises people. It is quiet, it is not flashy. You will not find it trending on social media, but in terms of what it actually does for blood sugar on a daily basis, it belongs on the top shelf of your pantry. And yet, most people with diabetes never use it. That is the thing I find most worth changing. Now, we arrive at the fifth and final flour, and I want to take a moment before we get into it to acknowledge something. If you have watched this far into the video, you are clearly someone who is serious about understanding your health, not just looking for quick fixes or trendy advice. And I appreciate that because the fifth flour rewards exactly that kind of curiosity because it is the one that almost everyone has heard of, but almost no one understands properly when it comes to blood sugar. The fifth flour is buckwheat flour. And let us start with the name because it creates confusion. Despite the word wheat in its name, buckwheat is not wheat. Is It is not even a grass. It is actually a seed from a flowering plant related to rhubarb and sorrel. It contains zero gluten, which makes it naturally suitable for people who are sensitive to gluten. But more importantly, for our purposes, it has a completely different effect on blood sugar compared to wheat. The glycemic index of buckwheat flour sits in the low to moderate range, generally between 45 and 55, depending on how it is processed. That is significantly lower than white wheat flour and puts it in safe, manageable territory for blood sugar management. But the truly unique thing about buckwheat, the thing that sets it apart from everything else on this list, is a compound it contains called D-chiroinositol. Now, that sounds very scientific, so let me explain what it actually does. D-chiroinositol is a naturally occurring compound that plays a direct role in how your cells respond to insulin. Think of it this way. Insulin is the key that is supposed to open the door to your cells so glucose can enter and be used for energy. In type 2 diabetes, that lock becomes stiff. The key does not turn as easily. D-chiroinositol is essentially a lubricant for that lock. It helps the cellular machinery respond to insulin more efficiently, meaning your cells can take up glucose more effectively, meaning less glucose stays stuck in your bloodstream. Multiple clinical studies have examined D-chiroinositol specifically in the context of metabolic conditions, and the results have been consistently interesting. It is one of the reasons buckwheat has been studied, not just as a food, but as a therapeutic ingredient in diabetes management. Now, there is something else about buckwheat that is worth understanding, and it has to do with something called the glycemic load, which is different from the glycemic index. The glycemic index tells you how fast a food raises blood sugar, But the glycemic load takes into account how much of that food you are actually eating in a typical serving. Buckwheat has what researchers call a very favorable glycemic load, meaning that even at realistic serving sizes in a real meal, the actual glucose impact is modest and manageable. This is important because some foods look alarming on paper when you check the glycemic index. But in the real portion size you would eat, they behave much more gently. Buckwheat is one of those foods. The numbers in real meals are consistently better than people expect. Buckwheat is also rich in a type of antioxidant called rutin, which has been studied for its potential effects on blood vessel health. People with diabetes are at higher risk for complications affecting small blood vessels throughout the body, so anything that supports blood vessel integrity is worth paying attention to. Rutin appears to strengthen the walls of blood vessels and reduce oxidative damage, which is the kind of cellular wear and tear that is accelerated by chronically high blood sugar. It is not a cure and it is not magic, but it is a meaningful bonus that comes built into this flour. There is also a practical benefit to buckwheat flour that goes beyond blood sugar. It is genuinely filling. This is because it contains both protein and a type of soluble fiber that expands in your stomach and signals to your brain that you are satisfied. One of the underappreciated problems in diabetes management is constant hunger, particularly in the hours after a high carb meal. When you feel hungry all the time, you tend to eat more, which leads to more glucose fluctuation throughout the day. Foods that genuinely satisfy hunger and keep you full for longer are not just convenient, they are a real tool in managing overall daily glucose exposure. Buckwheat pancakes or buckwheat crepes in the morning can keep you genuinely comfortable until lunch without that mid morning crash and desperate search for a snack. In the kitchen, buckwheat flour is genuinely versatile. It is the traditional flour used in Japanese soba noodles, in French buckwheat crepes called galettes, in Eastern European blini, and in American style buckwheat pancakes that have been a staple in traditional cooking for generations. It has an earthy, slightly robust flavor that some people find unusual the first time they taste it. This is the most common reason people try it once and give up. But here's what I consistently see. After 2 or 3 uses, that flavor becomes familiar. By the second week, most people who felt uncertain about the taste say it has become their preferred pancake flour. The flavor grows on you, and then it becomes something you crave. The earthiness pairs beautifully with a little cinnamon, vanilla, or fruit. In savory applications, it goes well with mushrooms, greens, and eggs. One practical tip for starting with buckwheat flour: try blending it 50-50 with almond flour for your first batch of pancakes. The almond flour lightens the texture slightly and softens the flavor of the buckwheat, making the transition easier. Then, gradually shift the ratio toward more buckwheat as you get comfortable with it. By the time you are using it at full strength, you will probably wonder why you were ever hesitant. Now, let me pull all 5 of these together and talk about something practical, because I do not want you to leave this video feeling overwhelmed by 5 different new flours to track down and experiment with. Let me be straightforward about how I would recommend approaching this. If you are completely new to flour swaps, start with almond flour. It is the most forgiving in terms of cooking, the easiest to find, and it has essentially zero glycemic impact. Use it for your next batch of pancakes or weekend baking, and just notice how you feel compared to using regular flour. That is it. One swap, one observation. If you want to address fiber intake specifically, try adding coconut flour to one recipe this week. Remember the quarter cup rule. Use much less than you think you need and increase the liquids in your recipe. Start with something simple like a flatbread or a muffin recipe specifically designed for coconut flour. If you eat a lot of tortillas or savory foods, chickpea flour is your most natural starting point. The flavor works seamlessly in those applications, and the transition feels almost effortless. If you want the biggest impact on your blood sugar curve from meals, flaxseed flour is the one to prioritize. You do not even need to bake with it at first. You can start by stirring 2 tablespoons into something you already make every morning: a smoothie, a bowl of oatmeal, a yogurt. It mixes in easily, adds almost no detectable flavor in small amounts, and the gel forming effect starts working from your very first use. And if you are ready to commit to a real long term upgrade to your staple cooking flour, buckwheat is where you eventually want to land. It is nutritionally exceptional, it cooks beautifully in real traditional dishes, and the dechiroinositol benefit is something you are simply not going to find in any other flour on this list. One thing I want to add before the challenge section, and I think this is genuinely useful for anyone who is starting to pay more attention to how food affects their blood sugar. There is a concept called food pairing, and it is one of the most underused tools in practical diabetes management. The idea is simple. How a food affects your blood sugar is not just about that food in isolation. It is about what you eat alongside it. When you eat any flour based food, even a lower glycemic one, pairing it with a source of fat, protein, or fiber from another part of the meal slows the entire digestive process further. So, if you are making buckwheat pancakes, adding eggs and some avocado on the side is not just a nice breakfast. It is actively reducing the glycemic impact of the entire meal. The protein from the eggs slows gastric emptying. The fat from the avocado further slows glucose absorption. The buckwheat flour is already doing its job, and the other foods amplify that effect. This is why a well composed meal can produce a much gentler blood sugar response than the glycemic index of any single ingredient would predict. You are not just choosing better ingredients, you are building a smarter system around them. And once you start thinking that way, choosing meals becomes a very different experience from just worrying about what to avoid. Here's your 7-day challenge. For the next 7 days, replace the flour in just one meal per day with any of the 5 options we covered. One meal, your breakfast tortilla, your morning pancakes, your afternoon flatbread. Choose one. And if you have a glucose monitor, check your blood sugar before that meal and then again 90 minutes afterward. Write it down. Do the same thing the following week with your original flour on the same meal. Compare the numbers. Let the data speak, not fear, not theory. Data from your own body. If you do not have a glucose monitor, pay attention to how you feel instead. Do you feel the usual energy crash 90 minutes after eating? Or does your energy stay more steady? Are you genuinely hungry again an hour later, or do you feel satisfied for longer? Are you mentally clear and focused, or do you feel that familiar fog? These subjective signals are real. They are your body telling you exactly what it is experiencing. And when you feel the difference, consistency becomes easy because you are not following a diet anymore. You are just choosing the thing that makes you feel better. Let me also address something that I think is worth saying directly because it comes up often in conversations with patients and viewers. You may be watching this and thinking that you have already tried everything and it never made a real difference, or that your diabetes is just too far progressed for these kinds of changes to matter, or that the people who get results from dietary changes are somehow different from you. I want to push back on that gently but clearly. Diabetes is not a fixed state. It is a dynamic condition that responds to what you do every single day. And the research on glycemic impact, on fiber, on insulin sensitivity is not limited to early stage diabetes. These mechanisms apply to your body regardless of how long you have been managing this condition. The biology does not stop working. Your cells do not stop responding. And every meal is a new opportunity to either work with your body or put it under additional stress. That is a genuinely empowering thing, even if it does not feel like it yet. You do not need to be perfect. Perfect is not the goal, and it is not realistic. The goal is better, more consistent, more controlled, more days where you feel like yourself instead of like you're fighting your own body. And better is absolutely achievable with the right information, with the right tools, and with the simple willingness to try one new thing at a time. I also want to name something that often gets lost in conversations about diabetes management, and that is the emotional weight of living with this condition every day. The constant monitoring, the decisions at every meal, the guilt when numbers are high, the fear about long term complications. That is real and it is exhausting. And the reason I care so much about practical, simple, food based strategies is that they give you something you can actually control when so many other things about managing diabetes feel out of your hands. You cannot always control your genetics. You cannot always control your stress levels or your sleep, but you can choose what flour goes into your breakfast. That is yours. And small things that are yours matter enormously. And speaking of sleep, that is something I want to touch on briefly because it connects directly to flour choices in a way most people have never considered. Poor sleep is one of the most consistent drivers of blood sugar dysregulation the following day. When you sleep badly, your body produces more cortisol, a stress hormone that tells your liver to release stored glucose into your bloodstream even when you have not eaten. That is why some people wake up with high fasting glucose, even though they ate well the night before. But here is the connection to flour. When you eat a breakfast that causes a sharp blood sugar spike and then a crash, your body interprets that crash as a mild stress signal. Cortisol rises slightly to correct the low. That cortisol can make it harder to feel calm, focused, and settled throughout the day. Over time, this pattern contributes to a kind of background metabolic stress that worsens sleep quality at night, which worsens glucose the next morning, which creates another spike and crash cycle. It is a loop. And choosing lower glycemic flours at breakfast is one of the most direct ways to interrupt that loop from the very start of the day. So let me recap the five flours one more time, clearly and simply, so you can keep this in your memory as you go forward. First, almond flour, glycemic index near zero, great for baking, pancakes, and most sweet recipes. Helps with magnesium and insulin function. Has a second meal effect that keeps your blood sugar stable beyond just that one breakfast. Start here if you are new to flour swaps. Second, coconut flour. 13 times more fiber than wheat flour. Glycemic index around 35. Slows sugar absorption dramatically. Feeds beneficial gut bacteria that communicate with your pancreas. Use only a quarter of what wheat flour recipes call for and increase your liquids. Perfect for flatbreads, quick breads, and muffins. Third, chickpea flour. Glycemic index around 44. High protein, slows digestion, and reduces spikes. Contains resistant starch that does not convert to blood sugar. Contains protease inhibitors that slow the breakdown of carbohydrates during digestion. Best for savory dishes, tortillas, flatbreads, and soups. Fourth, flaxseed flour. Glycemic impact near zero. Forms a protective gel in your gut that slows sugar absorption from your whole meal. Has been shown to improve not just post meal glucose, but fasting glucose over several weeks. Contains lignans for insulin sensitivity and omega 3s for reducing inflammation. Store in the fridge. Use ground, not whole seeds. 2 tablespoons a day is a great starting point. Fifth, buckwheat flour. Glycemic index in the low to moderate range. Contains dikairoinositol that helps cells respond better to insulin. Has a favorable glycemic load, meaning it behaves even better in real meal portions than the index alone suggests. Contains rutin for blood vessel health, genuinely filling due to its protein and soluble fiber. Earthy flavor that most people grow to love after a few uses. Try it 50-50 with almond flour to start. Five flours. Five completely different mechanisms working in your favor. All of them practical. All of them available. All of them backed by real science. And none of them requiring you to give up the foods that make eating feel like something worth enjoying. One more thought before we close. There's a belief that I encounter regularly among people managing diabetes, and it breaks my heart a little every time I hear it. Your The belief is that their life has to get smaller now. That pleasure in food is behind them. That every bite is a risk and every meal is a negotiation with their body. I want to be absolutely clear. That is not what a well managed relationship with diabetes looks like. Diabetes does not mean your life gets smaller, it means your strategy gets smarter. And smarter strategies are things you can learn, they are things you can practice, they are things that over time become second nature. The right flour can mean fewer spikes, better energy through the day, less inflammation over months and years, and a freedom at the table that you may have felt was gone forever. That freedom is still available to you. It might just be one flower swap away from beginning. Health is not about punishment. It is about understanding your body well enough to give it what it actually needs. And you deserve that understanding. You deserve that knowledge. And you deserve to eat breakfast without fear. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe because this channel exists for one reason: to make health information clear, practical, and accessible to real people living real lives. We are not here for trends or extremes. We are here for the honest, useful, evidence based information that helps you make better choices today, tomorrow, and long term. And if you want to go deeper, if you want a more comprehensive guide to blood sugar control, inflammation, healthy aging, and protecting your long term health, the longevity guide linked in the description below was built specifically for real life, not perfection, real life. Check it out when you are ready. Thank you so much for watching this entire video. It genuinely means a lot. I will see you in the next video.